Hello, everyone. Today is the first ever episode of Research Mavericks, our podcast about researchers, the future of research. So, we are very excited to talk about this topic with you all. And for the first episode, we have Luke Williams, our board advisor, with us today, who's a specialist in the field. Luke is a senior director of CX measurement and insights at Microsoft today and is an award winning researcher and author of the New York Times bestseller, The Wallet Allocation Rule and Why Loyalty Matters. He also publishes regularly in academic journals and well known business journals such as the Harvard Business Review and a lot more credentials. Of course, I cannot summarize it in 30 seconds, but I would love to pass on the mic to Luke, literally, to so he can provide a little bit of an introduction and kickstart our first ever podcast. Welcome, Luke.
Yeah, thanks, Sumit, for having me. Pretty excited. First of all, I love kind of the name of the podcast, name of the series. I'm a little bit maybe not of a traditional researcher in a lot of respects. In some cases, I do color outside the lines. I do have a background in research methods. I do have an advanced degree in research methods and statistics, and I've been a researcher for just about 20-ish years now. So plenty of people with a lot more experience, a lot of people with a lot less experience. But I do try to find my place in the world by finding things that don't quite make sense and then trying to make sense of them, which in some cases sometimes earns you the moniker of being a little bit of a maverick. So I'm excited for the podcast and the series. Excited to work with Voxco, of course, as an advisor. And I think just to get us kicked off, I want to say like we're getting ready to kick into summertime, and a lot of researchers going on vacation. So if you are on a beach listening to this podcast, you're a person just like me. So I'm excited to get into the topics today.
Awesome. Welcome again, our Maverick number one, Luke. So now we're going to dive deeper into our backgrounds and let people just give us an idea of how do people get into this field. But before, if we do that, maybe let's provide a little bit of your background, how you got into the field, what is your background, what excited you, what enticed you as a young researcher X years back, getting into this field when it was fairly new and not as glamorous as some might say.
Yeah, the glamour definitely didn't come into the industry until a little bit later. I will say though that the industry's got a long history. For those who don't know it, a lot of names that go really far back. I think it's important to know those backstories of the research industry. I came in to research. I think like many people, I kind of came into it a little bit sideways. I had, my undergraduate degree is a social science, degree. I had kind of like limited options. I was looking at different styles of careers. I was going to go be a teacher. At the time that I decided to go to graduate school, I was doing logistics optimization for a newspaper company. So it's not exactly, it's not like I was born and bred in a laboratory. But what I did find that I've always had is a knack for trying to understand using systems and methods to understand, like figure problems out in useful ways. In some cases, not so useful. So how I came into the research space was I decided, to take my knack for trying to understand things and turn it into a career. Because what I was finding was that the standard playbook of people handing me operational things to go do was something I could do, but wasn't something that made my socks roll up and down. And when you're 24 years old, that's all you care about, right? So I decided to go to graduate school. I went to the University of Durham in England, which most people in the U.S. may have never heard of. It's kind of a top 5 university there. I got my master's degree in research methods. And when I came out of graduate school, I wanted to save the world with great research, right? My dream had kind of been at the time to go work at the UN and do policy work. And that was something I always wanted to pursue, but it was 2007 and nobody was willing to pay for people to go save the world with research. I went instead to go work at the third largest research company in the world, which is at the time was Ipsos, helping credit card companies make more money. So that was a little bit of a shock of the reality of like what professionalized research really looks like, because you don't always get to pick and choose where you go and what you study. But spent a great career at Ipsos, 9 years, kind of rose up through to be head of research methods, head of the consulting practice there. Went client side for a while at a Fortune 150 company most people have never heard of called AECOM, which is an amazing large engineering company, working on super hard problems. If for company as diverse as the company that manages all subsurface transportation in New York City versus building dams versus creating, oil rigs 30 miles offshore, whatever it is. How do I measure that consistently across a giant business? And then from there, I went to work at a company that was smaller at the time, is bigger now, called Qualtrics, where I was head of CX strategy, and then enjoyed a nice career there for 5 years. I refer to that as 35 dog years because it was fast paced and was my first intro to really working in tech. Now working at Microsoft for the past year and a half, it's been pretty intense, to go back into an environment where we're trying to understand a really complex business. And I've learned every method that I can along the way. I started out as a generalist and I specialized in market research and in loyalty, product testing, customer experience, brand experience, and just trying to put all the pieces together to make sense of the data that the world has. And the way that I've always approached the problem is, if every perspective is valid, how do I organize that? How do I organize research and information so that it best mimics or explains verifiable reality? And not getting kind of like hung up on methods or capabilities, but staying focused on the problem of research, which is trying to explain, either what's going on or how to get people to do things. So it's a pretty exciting space to me. 20 years later, it still makes my socks roll up and down, gets me out of bed every day pretty early.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Luke. It is, of course, indeed a remarkable career. Actually, let's dig deeper into the customer loyalty concept a little bit. And you've written two books, maybe more that I'm not aware of, but one, the why loyalty matters, and the second one is Wallet Allocation Game, which was one of the New York Times bestsellers. So maybe talk to us a little bit about customer loyalty, ways to promote it. How do you differentiate yourself today in this environment, which is so competitive? How do you differentiate yourselves as a brand?
It's like, this is one of those like weird little myths, right? That you can hear them all the time, right? So myths in the industry is one of the big challenges. One of the things I love going to do like myth busting on. And you hear these little things that get said. They're easy things to say. They sound generally right. They get repeated, proliferated, and then people adopt them as true. Things like today's customer they're not as loyal as customers were 20 years ago. It's like, that is just not true. It is simply not true. Like it is one of those things where the biggest threat to customer loyalty goes back to this innovation question, right? Of like, loyalty is earned. It is earned by defining a brand, delivering a product and a service that is differentiated and valuable to people. It could differentiate on quality, on availability, on price, on jobs to be done. It could differentiate on 100 things. And what ends up happening is that the barrier to entry for most companies now is as easy as having a supply chain that runs overseas and having a Facebook campaign that delivers you all birds. Like, it is that level of disruption to a Nike, for example. Like, it's not that people aren't loyal. It's that there's no reason for people not to be. You haven't given them sufficient reason to not try stuff. We all have brands that we love, and people can come up with a competitor brand, and you're like, yeah, I'm not interested, because you found the brand that resonates for you, and that's where you remain your loyalty. You look at, the classic Dunkin' Donuts versus Starbucks fight down here in the United States. It is literally the case that you cannot get Starbucks drinkers to drink Dunkin' Donuts. Even if you took Starbucks away, they won't drink Dunkin' Donuts, right? They have found a different way to kind of compete for a loyal customer. Now, if I put lookalikes to Starbucks versus a local coffee versus a Pete's Coffee in LA or something, a little bit different, right? What we've said is that the lack of differentiation is what allows, quote unquote, disloyalty to show up in your database. What's happening really is that you've lost competitive differentiation on the things which drive your business. And when that happens, it doesn't mean you can't grow. It just means that other people are going to grow too. And at some point, you're going to rely on category growth rather than competing on share of wallet. And loyalty is absolutely innate to most cultures, right? And even most kind of social institutions. The concept is, built on a variety of things, but understanding your customer base of what it is about you that they're loyal to. Are they loyal to your convenience? If so, something that's even modestly convenient could defeat you, right? By saying, hey, I don't need to go to that extra store to get, amazing wine and cheese. The Whole Foods wine and cheese is like sufficiently good. It doesn't, and it's not better than the specialty store, but it's sufficiently good. So what you were differentiating on, you miscalculated. Like, what is the trade-off for that? And loyalty, honestly, is with customers and in a capitalist world, is about evaluating trade-offs. At what point does that coffee become too expensive? Right? And it's understanding the limitations of that, the lack of understanding of customers, the lack of research in some cases to support business decisions is what has created this environment. That and just general product availability. The number of products available today from the number of companies versus 30 years ago is just not incomparable. And these things, they ebb and flow. People they proliferate and they contract. But you can't tell me that people aren't loyal to Netflix. You can't tell me that people aren't loyal to Prime. You can't tell me, you can't tell me that people aren't loyal to BMW. Like there's just no evidence for that. Like so it's I think the evidence that they provide is valid in that they see a decline in repeat purchase. But I would say it's not because of the person, it's because of the company. So there's a little bit of a different kind of hook in there.
Yeah. I think that's an important point. Let's dig into that a little bit more, right? So, what exactly are customers loyal to, right? And probably somebody at a corporation should spend a lot of time understanding that, right? So, connecting our story back to the researchers where we were discussing what kind of challenges researchers are facing today when they're trying to understand these problems. What are the limitations? What is the sandbox they're playing in?
I mean, this is my everyday life now, Sumit. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
So it's the challenges that you face as a researcher come from a variety of vectors. One, the availability of operational data, right? In companies now, if they don't have it, they'd be remiss, right? Hundreds of millions of variables on billions and trillions of records. The availability of data, right? People think more data equals better data, and I'm not a believer in that at all. I think small data can pierce big data all over the place. Like I can literally probably will write a whole book on it. But what ends up happening is that you're competing in a room of loud voices where everybody wants to be the person who brings the answer. The operations person does, the data analyst does, the data science engineers do, and you're really competing on a different style of information. You're not competing on what happened. You're not competing on volume and things like that. You're in some cases trying to predict the future, right? And that can be, a technical challenge for sure. And then linking that prediction to financial outcomes has traditionally been a barrier, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you're saying like, well, higher CSAT should equal more money. It's not true. Like it's just, it's one of those great myths out there. It's like being better than competitors for every individual customer is better, but the score itself is kind of irrelevant. It's your positioning by the number of individuals, and you need to look at things at the human level. If you can come to a table and bring a very different style of approach that resonates with what is true in the world, people will see it. They'll go, yes, this makes more sense. I'm not trying to win a CSAT scale. I'm trying to win a human. What percentage of humans are we winning with? So it's not whether we're great, right? When we're Microsoft and we're competing with some of the biggest, smartest companies in the world, everybody's good. Like it's the smallest amount of delta that changes share of wallet. So the things that compete with me are one, availability of all that other data. Two, budget, right? When you look at budget, one of the historical challenges in research has been, well, we can't get budget and they won't give us budget and there's not enough budget. Let me tell every researcher on the planet, there's more than enough budget for good ideas. If you can make a case for a good idea, research is one of the least expensive things that companies spend money on. If you don't believe me, go look at how much it costs to run a contact center. So it's when you're asking for $1 million, a lot of researchers think that's a lot of money. To companies, it isn't. To companies, it's a rounding error for like local taxes. So it's like if I can say, hey, I need $2 million, but it's a $500 million idea, there isn't a person on the planet who won't give you the money to figure it out. but you got to be right and do it well. So I think the other part is, controlling for quality of research can be a challenge. So it's like, I'm not evaluating just your idea, but I'm evaluating the usefulness of research generally. So in part, it's our individual fight. The other part is that we as a collective like need to raise the bar. We need to work on harder problems. We need to use bigger, better, faster tools. We need to, push the envelope on all the stuff that isn't in the operational data, right? And that matters a ton. So when you look at someone's like database and it says, happier customers is better. It's like, well, how come 25% of customers who just churned gave us a 9 or a 10 on the last survey before they went out the door? The answer is because they didn't leave you because you were bad. There's different reasons people leave, and we're focusing on one. And there's 3 other ones, right, that are actually more important. So it's like, and that's where, you kind of like bring a different look to a person and say, I want to evaluate churn for what it is and its root causes, because there's no one solution. Like, let's get out of that habit. And a researcher who can bring data to that argument and say, I can predict in the future that, yes, you're using and consuming our products, but I can predict the date that you're going to go. And the more that I can increase accuracy around that, that is something that other people can't do. So in some ways, it's, are you saying something valuable? Is it rare? For sure. Understanding outside in is more rare than people think. And is it inimitable? It is. You can't substitute what research does. There's very little that we can do with research that doesn't benefit from having additional operational data. But if you look at statistical substitutability, there's a really important delta that goes from 60 to 90 in terms of decision-making quality. So it's a very different challenge, I think, that most people are not used to solving, because usually the research itself is hard enough. What I would say is, like, go deeper. It's harder, So if someone's asking you to do easy work, chances are we can do better.
Right. Fair enough. Couple themes that emerged in this explanation, Luke. Now we're talking about the future of research. We're talking about what are you excited about in that future, right? Because we're building the future together, and we love your inputs literally as a board advisor, but in general as a practitioner also. So over to you, because that is, I think, our last question of the day and probably the most important.
What am I most excited about?
Yeah,
is that the question?
That's the question.
Well, okay. That's
Not the BMW.
I'm excited. I'm excited about a couple things. One, I think AI will make researchers better, but not in the way that they think. Right? People are like, is AI going to replace research? I'm like, no, not even a little bit. It's actually going to make you more important than you've ever been before. Because the two sides of AI and generative AI, one is the large language model, which is, for some of those applications, is just amazing. But the other side of it is the knowledge base that it pulls from. And in many ways, research is you're a knowledge maker or a knowledge organizer. This is the opportunity of a lifetime if you are in the research family. To be able to step in and say, all the operational folks are throwing this stuff in, throwing in a different style of data, and being the only curators of that and using technology to proliferate when, where, and how we listen, you can become not only the person who understands how to ask things the right way and acquire information correctly, but how to organize it in context, which is really missing in most instances. It's not about one study. It's about what we learned from 80 studies that are all happening simultaneously. So I'm very excited about the future of AI for researchers. The second thing is I think what we're starting to see is the recognition that research, like, we went through a period where, like, everybody was over investing in CRM and ERP. And I think what people are coming back to is that research is essential, and companies are becoming much more research dependent, more than ever before. Like, you can't do UX without having a research study. You can't change a website without having a research study. You can't launch a product without having data somewhere. So it's about understanding the needs of the business and try, like, figuring out how to adapt and what are the legacy techniques that maybe don't serve, the future, right? There's lots of things that we stopped doing. The last part I'm loving is, honestly, is like, a good method is a good method, right? We've seen the resurgence of things that when you look at like, caddy based research was the standard forever, forever, along with like even postal and in-person intercept and all that kind of stuff. '07 comes around and everything goes down the digital route, and that's important. But the attraction wasn't quality; the attraction was price, right? So what you're starting to see is that through survey fatigue and people not curating things well, you're starting to see like, you're never going to get a CIO or any of the 10 people who work for him to take a survey ever. The only way you're going to get information from them is an in-depth interview on the phone or in person. Like, and understanding that how we capture information for a researcher, the survey, the interview, all of it is a template for a data set. All of it. So if we look at it from that mentality, we can kind of free ourselves methodologically. And I think that's really exciting. So I think when I combine those three things of like the level of opportunity inside of companies, the proliferation of sort of available technology in our role in the future, and then understanding that methodological freedom means that we can drive into that future in any version we choose to create for ourselves. It's going to include surveys. It's going to include interviews. It's going to include all that. What's next? Like that's the next part. And I'm very excited about, I think those three things, probably my top three. I could go on as you've seen, but I think those are my top three.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Luke. No, really appreciate it. Listen, I think we're fully aligned on having a multimodal data collection capabilities and actionable insights world, creating it together. That's why I'm excited about it. Every single day I wake up, and unlike yourself, we're creating it together. I really want to thank you for taking the time. I know you have a very busy schedule, but thank you so much for being our Maverick number one. And this is going to help so many people in understanding what research is, improving the quality of research, using better tools, how to address challenges. And we will absolutely love to have you on board again multiple times. I'm sure people will have questions for you, Luke, because people are trying to understand these problems. So maybe we can have a Q&A session once we launch this podcast, which should be in the coming weeks.
I'd love that. And then the only thing I would say when I'm closing out is that everyone who's listening,
Yeah.
you're all research heroes, right? We're all in the same boat together. I'm a firm believer, right? Talking heads and big ideas, that's important. But solving real challenges and bringing real value, you know it, I know it. There's 10 million amazing researchers out there you may never have heard of. Yeah. So band together and share ideas. And I think this podcast, I'm excited to see, the speaker setup for all the Mavericks to come. But you don't have to be on this podcast to be a research Maverick. So good job out there, guys.
Thank you so much, Luke. Salute to the research heroes out there. Keep doing a fantastic job. And we are in here to make your lives easier and better, create that future for all of us that's going to make the research a better place.